DJ Leroy.
Night Watchman. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Welcome back.
Oh, you too. You too. Did you have a good week?
Always.
Nice. Well, needless to say, a lot of stuff popping off there. I see that there was actually some bipartisan agreement on climate change. Can you believe that?
It's hard to believe. Both parties working together. It seems like something that used to happen in the past.
Oh, who knew? Well, needless to say, we're going to have a nice little discussion this evening, especially about that particular deal. And also, most importantly, sometimes I guess the craziness, the gridlock, and just the chatter and noise that's been coming out of Washington, and we have actually some pundits on who definitely have some opinions about what's going on. When we bring them out, what do you say?
Sounds like a good idea.
Okay. Well, this first guest, this is her first time on Soul Lounge Primetime, but she's no stranger to, let's say, doing the good work in a community like Harlem and beyond. And that is none other than Peggy Shepard, co-founder and executive director of WEACT for Environmental Justice. And she has a long history, and I mean long history, of organizing and doing stuff for folks uptown but beyond, Night Watchman. Do you know this?
I do know this. She has national influence, not just national, state, local, doing it.
She does it all. Hey, how you doing, Peggy?
Welcome.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Absolutely. And although our next guest, returning guest, has been at Soul Lounge Primetime a number of times, right? And he's a born and bred Harlemite, right? So when you think about Detroit Red, think of Harlem Red. That can be none other than Professor Wallace Ford II.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. We'll talk about that red business a little bit. That's okay. I'll meet you downstairs.
Anyway, let's get it started. So, Ms. Shepard, now, you are a real champion and hero here in West Harlem. I notice I'm one of your constituents right here on 143rd Street, and you've been doing this good work. I've even played ball on what some would say could be like an environmental hazard waiting to happen, and that is, of course, the North River sewage treatment plant. So please tell me about what spurred your impetus in creating WEACT.
Well, I had come out of the Jesse Jackson campaign. I've been working with Bill Lynch, a master campaigner who helped David Dinkins become mayor. And he suggested that I run for Democratic district leader with Chuck Sutton. And so we ran with the idea of creating a new political activism in West Harlem, which we felt had been overlooked by most of our Central Harlem elected officials. And so we really wanted to, reactivate the community. And we found a number of senior citizens who had been getting the vote out there for years, who had a political club. They embraced Chuck and I and helped us get elected. And one of the first things they said after we were elected was, guess what? There's the sewage treatment plant in the Hudson River, and the odors and emissions are making us sick. So we started a 6-year campaign working to get the city. The mayor was Mayor Koch, and he totally avoided uptown folks and elected officials, and we had to hold Koch accountable. And until David Dinkins became borough president and then mayor, when he got in, he said, look, there's a problem here and we're going to fix it.
Nice. Yes. And of course, there were definitely you as a new organization and resource coming to the community. I know there was really hardly any support except from the community.
That's correct. After we got involved with the sewage treatment plant, we realized that we are housing all these bus depots up here. So fuel is really, really bad for your health. And so they were building another one and closing another depot downtown. So we filed a lawsuit against the MTA. Wow. It was not upheld, But again, it began our 18-year campaign to get the MTA to convert every bus to a hybrid. And now they are beginning to convert them to electrification. So it really shows you how what seemed to be a small community issue of housing all these depots, we've cleaned up the buses for every single person in New York City.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Professor Ford, now, you, of course, are a professor at Medgar College in Brooklyn, but you're a West Harlem native and resident. So tell us about your advocacy and how long you've been there. Besides, also, you noticed that Ms. Shepard mentioned, of course, the Dinkins administration. And that's where we first crossed paths. So tell me about your journey, man.
You're on mute.
Nope.
Sorry about that. I didn't want to.
Right.
I didn't want to accidentally interrupt the legend. No, it's correct. I was born in Harlem. I was born in what was then Sydenham Hospital. It was closed by the Koch administration, as a matter of fact.
That's right.
And I now it's a senior citizens home. I was concerned about that because if I ever see myself being wheeled back into that building, as the circle is now complete, right? So I don't, I'm not going in there anytime soon. But I actually left New York with my parents, obviously, and went to school in Japan and Puerto Rico and Teaneck, New Jersey. And after attending Dartmouth College and Harvard Law School, I came back to New York, as it were, and basically been living in Harlem ever since. And it's interesting, Peggy, of course, you're mentioning our dear departed friend, David Dinkins. I first came to know Mr. Dinkins when I was president of the Harlem Lawyers Association, which ultimately merged into the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, which is one of the things we proposed. And basically then active in Harlem, as you know, in many respects, as best we can. When David Dinkins first ran for Manhattan Borough President, I was his speechwriter and helped him pick out his shirt for his first TV debate, and helped manage the campaign and all those things. We didn't win, but sometimes you learn by losing. And fortunately, one of the things that when he did become mayor, I was asked to be first commissioner of ports and trade, and people say, well, what is that about? Well, it includes things like La Marqueta in East Harlem, and of course the Fulton Fish Market and Hunts Point, which are all very interesting places that most of us don't visit, from and see it from the business side. And so and later on I became commissioner of the city's Department of Business Services, which was a new department at the time, and now it's the Department of Small Business Services. And we, thanks to Mayor Dinkins' leadership, established New York City's first MWBE, Minority Women's Business Enterprise Program, and in the history of the city of New York. And within a year, it became it was actually the largest municipally based program in terms of dollars being allocated in the country. And I know we were doing a good job. And Curtis, you know how I know we were doing a good job?
How?
Because when Rudy Giuliani became mayor, literally the first thing he did after taking the oath of office, he put his hand up, went back inside into City Hall and signed an executive order abolishing the MWBE program.
I do remember that. I do remember that.
And so, as I said, if Rudy Giuliani doesn't like it, it's probably a good thing. And, and needless to say, I was not asked to stay on as commissioner. And so that was, of course, I was going to do that anyway. But that is the part. But these days, I don't want to take too much time right now. But as for the last 8 years, I've been teaching at Medgar College and City University of New York. I also taught, have taught at Columbia University School of International Public Affairs and John Jay and Metropolitan College of New York and Pace, and really honing my craft as a higher education participant in my career after doing all these other things. And these days, what we do a lot of is trying to prepare young people to become leaders in this city, state, and country, and not only in the prominent, the people you see on TV and what have you, but in leadership positions in taking control of their own lives. What I tell students all of the time is that if you don't know how government works, then the people who do know how government works are going to use government against you. And the corollary to that is that if you're not at the table than you're on the menu. You know, but it's really true. You know, people don't, and Peggy, I know you know this, is that there's so many people even today who don't know who their city council member is, don't know what the governor does, don't know what, and I see Congressman Espaillat is there, and Congressman, I know you know this, people don't know what you do in Congress. You know, why it's important, why every day whatever you do is so damn important, and people don't know. But the people who do know are the ones that have been able to motivate state and national governments around, and the state governments around the country, and the national government to do some of the most horrific things that we've seen in a lifetime. You know, I'm 72 years old. I never thought I'd see a rollback of voting rights, a rollback of abortion rights, a rollback of the EPA, for goodness sake. You know, and gender equity, same-sex marriage, even interracial marriage. People say, well, Clarence Thomas would never vote for that. They won't make it retroactive. Okay. And so, right. But these are very daunting times, and so that's a lot of what I do these days.
Thank you, Professor. And absolutely, we have to welcome to the program, first time on Soul Lounge Primetime, Congressional District 13, my man, my representative, the Honorable Adriano Espaillat. How you doing, sir?
Good morning. Thank you, Curtis, Peggy. Good morning, Professor. Thank you for your insight, Peggy's work on environmental justice. Peggy's a rock star right here in Washington. They love her over here. They know that she's been in the trenches for so long, addressing these disparities in environmental issues, particularly with WEACT, and she has brought her message here to Washington, and I think she's having an impact in the conversation, and resources will be allotted more equitably, and I think that we will get more of our fair share because of Peggy's ongoing fight for decades, really, on behalf of environmental justice. And thank you for having me, Curtis.
Absolutely. And Congressman, I have to say, now back in the day, as a lifelong New Yorker, certainly my parents, I remember voting for Repubs, in their history, from John V. Lindsay, Jacob Javits, even for God's sake, Nelson Rockefeller. But Congressman, who is this party now? I don't recognize them. Tell me.
Well, they're to the right of Genghis Khan. Well, I tell you what has occurred, Curtis, since the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade. 25% of Americans, a historic law, have reported having lost confidence in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has been traditionally the great equalizer, where you can't get what is fair in the halls of justice, in the halls of Congress or in the legislatures across the country. You always go to the court, and, Brown versus the Board of Education overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. Time and time again, how the Supreme Court has been the avenue through which communities get access to have their say heard and fairness. And 25% of Americans right now, a historic low, have no confidence in the court. 56% of Americans disapproved the court's decision on Roe versus Wade. And with regards to gun control, almost 80%, 79% of New Yorkers supported the state gun laws, which were the strongest in the country. So if you wanted to get a permit to carry a weapon, you had to prove that, I remember back in the days, you had to prove that you carry money back home. You were a store owner. You felt that you were in danger, that they may hold you up at gunpoint or something, and you had to protect yourself. Or if you were a former police officer, things of that nature. The threshold was, the standards was very high. Now that's gone, and so now states have to jump in and legislate to try to overcome and push back on these decisions that I think are are trying to set the clock back, and there are 6 very conservative justices of the court.
Yes.
So this is an issue, and we see in the West Virginia Environmental Protection Agency case how they curtail the EPA's ability to set climate standards for power plants. And so this is going to be an ongoing fight. And we must do something to adjust this. I think that the Supreme Court system model has no limits, and that cannot be. Democracy must have guardrails, right? It must have parameters within which we function. And so whether it is to set term limits on the Supreme Court or the ability for us to strip them of their right to handle certain cases and give it to the District of Columbia, as has been done historically, or to expand the number of justices, we have to really take a deep dive and be deliberate about this. Also, we cannot do it off the cuff and see how we could reform the Supreme Court.
Wow.
If I might just add for a moment, and because Congressman, you raised a couple of really interesting points, and quoting Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the fault is not in the stars but in ourselves that we are underlings. This is you're so right about this, about the court system, Congressman, in terms of being the place of last resort, really first resort, particularly for the Black community, and where Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton at the Charles Hamilton Houston at Howard Law School put together a cadre of lawyers who, from the late 1930s right through 1954, they couldn't fight the battles in the legislature, they couldn't fight the battles in Congress, but they could through the court system. They understood the importance of the courts. What has happened, and the comment I made earlier is apropos, which is that somehow people who would consider themselves progressives, who consider themselves, in favor of basic rights and liberties, took their eye off the ball. Kind of thought the game was over in 1964. We got the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Actually, 1964 Civil Rights Act, 1965 the Voting Rights Act, and kind of took their eye off the ball. What happened? And there was very interesting. And Congressman, I'm sure you're aware of it with the Holder case in 2013, which gutted the Voting Rights Act, is that the New York Times that Saturday after the decision was announced did a full 3-page article on this gentleman who in 1965 dedicated his life to overturning the Voting Rights Act, or gutting the Voting Rights Act. And what did he do? He worked with the state legislatures. He worked with the at the federal level as well. But you started looking and say, okay, we need to get the right kind of members of Congress to be in there. We need to get the right kinds of judges, right from their standpoint. And this went on really, and so then you get that, the Shelby v. Holder decision in 2013. But think about it. Everybody's, again, people who consider themselves progressives or, liberal Democrats, whatever name you want to, in 2016 had a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, for all of his faults, actually didn't lie one time when he told people what he was going to do, which is that he was going to appoint judges to overturn Roe v. Wade. And yet people did not vote for Hillary because they didn't like Hillary, because Hillary treated Bernie Sanders badly, because the Clintons were bad to Black people, or maybe it'd be good for Trump to be president for 4 years because then people will understand why it's important to, and all of those things. And with everybody talking about the Supreme Court, what we are taking our eye off the ball again is that in his 4 years, Donald Trump appointed more federal judges than any president in recent history, including Obama, including George W. Bush, and so on. To forget the Supreme Court for a moment, the district court, the circuit courts, and those people are almost literally all in their 30s and 40s. If you think the people on the Supreme Court are right wing, you ought to see some of the people that got appointed to these other positions. And they are going to be there how long? For life. Okay, wow. So for all of us on this show right now, hopefully we're around 20 years from now. 20 years from now, those judges will still be there. they'll still be trying to tear up the Constitution. They'll still be trying to trample constitutional rights. And that's what happens when you take your eye off the ball. So we have to, whatever it will take to reverse that. And I'm not going to, perhaps Congressman, expanding the Supreme Court might be part of it, but there's a whole federal judiciary system that has now been skewed against us. And so we have to start, electing some more of your colleagues in Congress, for sure. But let's not forget the state legislatures. Let's not forget the city councils.
So I got a question. I got a question I want to ask to the panel.
Okay.
And I want to frame it with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I feel like it's something that we all believed for most of our lives. And now I want to ask, is that really the case now with basically the balance of power between executive, judiciary, and legislative branch at the federal level? That balance is broken. You've got with a rogue Supreme Court and an obstructionist legislator. We've backed away from it a little bit, but what's the pathway out of this?
Well, the professor is right. If you take a look at first the Shelby, the Holder Shelby case, it did away with pre-clearance. Prior to that, our voting rights law protected us to the degree that if a poll site was changed, it would have to be clear by the Department of Justice if you lived in a district that was protected, right? That had like a history of voting fraud or allegations of voter discrimination. And so, the way we are prevented from going to the polls is very technical. It's almost like taking down a transmission in a car. You have to put it back up, but when you turn the key, you better run. So you move a poll site 20 blocks or further out, and you see dramatic drops in voter participation. So it's simple things as simple as that are impacted by the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, and this is done because the courts at the circuit level have been also radicalized to the right. So this system of having a permanent court forever must be looked at. And we're not reacting because we feel that it is not our turn. I think it's flawed. Now, the Constitution is elastic, right? It has that ability. It's elastic. So, yeah, it could bend towards justice, but we got to put our shoulder into it.
Yes.
It won't bend by itself. We have to put our shoulder into it. And I think that's a great challenge that we're facing right now.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And you know what? So getting back in terms of, because the congressman certainly set it up there, Peggy, in terms of environmental stuff, because we see that there was an agreement. And let me understand. So did Joe Manchin actually understand that coal is not really coming back? Is that what caused it? Please tell me your thoughts on what has happened.
Well, it's not quite as wonderful as it appears. Yes, there's $60 billion in environmental justice investments that will help for electrification rebates, for solar manufacturing, but there's a lot of bad stuff here. Of course, Joe Manchin did this because he was getting something. So what is he getting? There's going to be a separate permit reform bill. And I know our Congressman Espaillat needs to really be looking at that. And they're thinking about discussing that in December. But that permit reform bill will be to allow industry to fast track permits for all kinds of pipelines and other major projects that have big impacts on communities. We also know that there are numbers of tax credits as well for biofuels, for nuclear. So there are a lot of things here that are in the finer details that are not good. And as a result, a lot of the environmental community, especially the environmental justice community, Native Americans, are opposed to this bill.
Wow.
Again, we're really pleased that this is a great step. There's more money that's been, appropriated for frontline communities than ever in history. But again, we're going to be taking some steps back unless we can hold the line on permitting and also looking at these tax credits for things that I'm sure Joe Manchin will be benefiting from.
Thank you for that. And so I have to put it out there now.
Curtis, I'd also just like to say
Go ahead.
that our representative Espaillat and Wallace Ford talked about the structural issues. And when you said, what's our path forward? We've got to invest more in community organizing. The Republicans have done that. They not only communicate well, but they're organizing. And the Democrats have not done that. And one thing that I'm seeing is that there are more funders who are calling up saying, do you have a C4, meaning a political organization? Because we want to give you money for that. And so finally, all around the country, we're getting donors and philanthropy understanding that without the civic engagement, without that grassroots base, we are not going to make a dent here. Okay. And so when we think about the midterm, I remember in the old days when, elected officials provided buses to get citizens to the polls. So yes, a lot of our polls have been moved, but we have not stepped up to ensure that our folks are getting out. So without that voter turnout, we're not going to have a path forward. We need the structural, but we also have to have the on-the-ground operation.
Well, let me just say, following up with what Peggy said, because it's important. It is very true, and I think obviously we all agree that the people who label themselves Republicans or conservatives have been very focused with respect to how to understanding how government works and understanding how, if you want to get certain policies in place, what you have to do. But we should not neglect the fact that there is literally a cabal of right-wing white billionaires who have been funding this for almost a half a century. I point to the Koch brothers, for example, out of Kansas, for example, who have been pouring billions, but they have a club of right-wing billionaires who fund centers for at different universities. They fund obviously campaigns, but they've really covered the waterfront. Typically, donors in the again on the, we'll call the progressive liberal side, focus on the bright shiny object. They'll give money to Barack Obama's campaign or Hillary Clinton's campaign. But to Peggy's point, it is and to the congressman as well, it is all what's the expression? All politics is local. Okay, you have to get people not only to come out to vote, but also know what they're voting for. And I ask people this all the time. When we look at the Black and brown communities, what are our gotta have items that you gotta have before we'll vote for you? Because to use an example, most Jewish communities, if you're not supporting Israel, you're just not going to get their vote. That's all there is to it. So, but what's our red line? I don't know if we have. Sometimes we're kind of in favor of affirmative action. Maybe we're not in favor of it. It kind of goes fair housing and all these kinds of things. We don't have red lines, and we need to have some red lines so people not only go to vote, but also know what they're voting for.
Yeah, Professor, I agree with you, and a lot of it, and the organizing part. And I'm an organizer at heart. I went down to the local cafeteria and I tried to organize the workers there in right here in Capitol Hill. But the Republican Party has spent a lot of money organizing state legislature, and they do that so that every 10 years, and they spend a lot of money trying to win governorships, and they now control a vast majority of the governorships and the state legislatures across the country. And they do that so that it coincides every 10 years we redistrict it. And so when that process occurs, then of course lines will be drawn that will make it difficult for us to gain the majority. I mean, airtight districts that numerically, in terms of Republican versus Democrats, will make it difficult for us to win those districts, congressional districts, and state districts as well, both assembly, state reps, and senators. And so that money is spent, as you said, by mega rich, very conservative folks. And we are raising the Republicans right now. But we're a broad tent party. We have the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Black Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus and the New Democrats and the Blue Dogs and the Problem Solvers and the Asian and Asian Pacific Caucus. And so we're a broad tent party. And when we have to make a decision and we take it to our caucus, it requires a lot of work. Right? We're not as monolithic as the Republican Party. They're red and white. And so that makes it easier for them to coalesce and to organize. And sometimes we stumble and we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so when we do that, I've come to agree that there's got to be consensus building, and in that process, you cannot get everything you want. I'll push to the end to get everything that I think is good for my district, but a consensus means that you have to be flexible in some ways, and so that impairs us from organizing quickly and effectively as the Republicans do. Because they're a smaller tent party. Now we have to be able to do better. I think that unfortunately these Supreme Court decisions have galvanized us, unfortunately, and we're now moving forward and trying to organize based on the real life impacts that these decisions will have on everyday folks. And I think that we're moving forward, but it's no easy task, but we got to do better. There's no question about that. And we got to be more competitive. We have to have a long-term strategy. I know Obama and Holder attempted to do that, right? When Obama left, to try to address the state houses and the districting. I didn't see the results that I would have expected, right? And as a result of that, you've seen the district lines in Texas. You see the district lines right in New York State.
Exactly.
New York State was supposed to be the great equalizer, right? Well, guess what?
You have incumbents running against incumbents now here in Manhattan.
Our top court, the Court of Appeals, drew districts that seemed like perhaps they could have been drawn in a red state. And so, and if you look at the makeup of the Court of Appeals, you will understand why.
Wow. So we're not going to say that we're doomed, but it ain't looking good. Which then I guess
Curtis,
yep.
just put a fine point on what the congressman was saying. 30 of the New York of the country's state legislatures out of 50 are controlled by Republicans. 28 out of 50 are Republican governors are Republicans. They are 3 legislatures away from being able to change the Constitution. You only need the 2/3. You need 2/3 of the states to go along with the changes in the Constitution of the United States. So meanwhile, again, we still have these internecine battles, and really, Congressman, the point you make is an excellent one. People are falling on the sword in favor of the perfect, and they don't even attain the good. And so it is. We're going to have a very different attitude towards things, and also, and again, Peggy and Congressman, I'm sure you would agree. We need to have people stop talking about defunding the police, which may be about the dumbest thing anybody's ever said in a political context. We know what they mean, but you give Republicans, why don't you just give them a sword and pull your collar down so they can just get rid of you right now? They defund the police. You have to stop saying it.
So you say sometimes the verbiage that we put out there is the negative thing, that they really don't even have to do anything.
Exactly.
Which then, Night Watchman, I hear you about to ask something. Go ahead. You're on mute.
This is a good place to remind people that this is a primary month here in New York, and so this conversation is not an idle one. We want to remind people that you're going to need to actually get out and vote here in the middle of the summer.
Absolutely.
For the second time, I may add.
Right. Exactly.
No doubt. And you know what? Okay, so Congressman, one of your colleagues actually said that January 6th was a tourist visit. I mean, I was watching the video. Do you agree that it was a tourist visit?
Listen, that was a
tourist or terrorist.
That was a deadly insurrection that actually ended up with people dying, and with attempted murder efforts to hang Mike Pence, one of their own, and Nancy Pelosi and others. And I believe that mob, that racist mob, was prepared to assassinate people.
Yes.
So that's serious. And I think that the January 6th committee is doing an excellent job. I would like to see consequences for that type of action. If any of us here engage in that type of action in front of a police precinct, in front of the state legislature, city hall, or even a community board meeting, we'll have probably been in jail a long time ago.
No doubt.
And so I want to see consequences, real consequences. I think that Chairman Thompson has been, again, deliberate and professional in his approach. And you need to be that way because the law needs to be applied equitably. But I believe that there is enough evidence and testimonies, thousands of pages of evidence and hundreds of witnesses have testified. And there's enough evidence to ensure that lots of folks need to be facing the criminal court system.
So, Congressman, tell me this. It's never been done. So definitely Donald Trump, based on where it's all leading, an ex-president, he should also be found accountable.
Well, there's a grand jury proceeding in motion right now. Where former Vice President Pence, Chief of Staff, has testified, and others will have to go before. And I believe, yes. I mean, we never had a president also step down from office, and Nixon did that, right? So there's it's always a first time, and I think it strengthens the Constitution, and it bolsters democracy when even the president of the United States is held accountable.
Gotcha. Professor Ford, I'm sure that you have an opinion on this as well.
Well, yeah. The thing that we have to look at, of course, is that even and your colleagues in the House of Representatives, Congressman, just will not vote to do anything against Donald Trump at all, except Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney. You see what happened to them, and or what's happening to them. And when you have a party that does not represent the majority of Americans, but because of the way that the Constitution structured American government, a minority of the population can actually, and we're seeing it, control Congress and therefore, control the judiciary and even the executive branch. I've written about this in my blog, and I give a big quick plug, thewallaceford.com, which is that the only modern example I can think of with respect to this is South Africa in 1948, where you had a white minority legally, I put that in quotes, establish a constitution which kept them in control, even though they were obviously in the minority. So even if Republicans take control of the House and the Senate, they still would not be representing anywhere near the majority of the American population. And so that's a big structural problem. And again, we've just not been paying attention. And if we don't pay attention, so if you're not at the table talking about this, then you're on the menu. And we're the main course at this point.
Wow. Peggy, you heard earlier in terms of we have this primary about to happen here, but you've definitely been proactive in terms of looking at some of the local races and getting involved. So your thoughts in terms of on the local level, being able to have substantive change here in New York City, especially as it wraps around environmental issues and also health of our community.
Yeah, it's really tough having this primary at the end of August when most people are visiting family down south or away for the weekends or summer vacations. So it's going to be tough for those folks having to run. We recently started WEACT for Change, a C4 organization, so that we can endorse candidates and do a lot more support around civic engagement for community residents.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important that we begin to get that vote out. But, it's funny. We've been realizing that some people running for office don't even have a campaign office for us to send volunteers to.
Wow.
The last primaries, you barely saw a poster so that you could be reminded that there's a vote. You didn't see anyone giving out palm cards much anymore. So I don't know what happened to our political field operations in the last 10 years or so, but we know that works.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know that when you've got a race that's going to be decided, my goodness, by very small numbers, under 100 perhaps, or even less, that this is really important, that we understand how the significance of electing people who represent our values and who are going to be fighters.
Right. So, Congressman, I have to just ask a question because I'm a novice in terms of, let's say, knowing the structure of government. So why every 2 years you got to run? Why not 4 years, something like that? Because it seems like every 2 years you're constantly campaigning and trying to raise dollars.
Well, that's the Constitution. That's what the Constitution prescribes, both locally, the state Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, of course, gives the senators a 6-year term, House members a 2-year term.
Wow.
So we have to amend the Constitution for that to change. I may add that to Peggy's point, that we have early voting, and that starts on the 13th. And we have seen how now close to almost a third of the vote is cast early.
Nice.
And so, and you may not see the posters because the Department of Environmental Protection gives you a $250 fine for each one. So that's one of the reasons why you may not see the posters. And of course, but I agree with Peggy that the primary turnout needs to be better. There needs to be a greater participation in the primary, as in districts like the ones that I represent, and others in Northern Manhattan and the Bronx. The primary pretty much is everything. Whoever wins the primary is pretty much in the driver's seat, and so we gotta have a bigger turnout. I've worked hard to increase the turnout. I remember when I first got elected to the state assembly, that assembly seat, the 72nd, used to average maybe about 3,000 on a good day, 4,000 votes in a primary. We worked hard to have, and frankly, I never shied from an election. I'm not the type that will like go to whatever distance to avoid an election. I've had in the last 26 years, maybe 22 primaries. And that 3,000 vote turnout at one point became 18,000 votes.
Wow, nice.
Competing against almost on the heels of some of the biggest turnout districts like the west side of Manhattan or central Brooklyn. And so you got to work at this, and people respond when there's a race, when there is a competitive race. They have choices, right? And that's what democracy is about. And so rather than, avoid a primary, I welcome them. Besides that, I lose 20 pounds and I got to go to choose. I mean, I gained it back before Thanksgiving, but that's okay.
So, Professor Ford, what are you going to be on vacation, or are you voting early? What's going on?
Yeah, I've been taking advantage of voting early just because sometimes things will. I think my record is pretty, over the many years I've been eligible to vote. I guess about 50 years now. Always vote, but stuff can come up on election day. You don't feel well, or there's an emergency. All kinds of stuff can happen, and so early voting I think is great. I as soon as the early voting opens up, I will. I try to vote just to make sure that I have voted. But to the Congressman's point about and the question that you asked, Curtis, about the Constitution establishes the House of Representatives as 2-year terms. That was supposed to be so people would be closer in contact with the quote will of the people. That actually worked pretty well until maybe about the last 10-15 years when you had a couple of Supreme Court decisions culminating in the Citizens United case, which just basically said you can put as much money as you want. Corporations can put as much money as they want into campaigns, and the spigots are open. Okay, and so now it costs millions of dollars even for local races, millions and millions. And billions of dollars to run for president. That's insane. Okay, it's insane that anybody would have that, and any other democracy in the world does not have that kind of unlimited campaign spending. And so so yes, even if you're a senator and you have a 6-year term, Congressman, this. People are raising money right now, and they don't have an election for 4 years down the line. And they're doing fundraisers, and they're doing calls, all of the time. All the time. That's part of the job.
I was involved in a race in the Bronx that a hedge fund guy dropped $1.5 million on a candidate who came in last place. And so voters are smarter than that. But for a hedge fund guy to come in and his corrupt intermediaries to come in and say, we know better than this district, and we know who, and this is who should represent them. I mean, that's a bit abrasive, right? And that happens at the national level. What you have through Citizens United, you have the system where almost anonymously someone could put as much money as they want to attack a candidate or support a candidate outside of the rails established by campaign finance. And so this is another sort of like level playing field where corporate America gets involved to control government. And in this case, in this Bronx race, God knows what their original intention was, whether it was real estate or something else. But one guy just from a hedge fund out there, Jane Street hedge fund, one of the wealthiest hedge fund in the country, all of a sudden got interested in the West Bronx. I mean, and dropped $1.5 million to a losing candidate that came in last place. And so it's smarter than that, and they often read through those kind of tactics.
Wow. Ms. Shepard, Tell me, so is there some money out there on the new organization of WEACT that you would not go after certain funds?
You know, we have never had a problem with foundation or government grants that suggested we had to have a certain agenda. So, you know, our funding comes from foundations and donors, not so much government grants. But I do want to talk about the money coming from the Biden administration into our frontline communities, and it's called Justice 40. And you know, Congressman Espaillat knows about that. And what we really need to do is ensure that more of our policymakers in New York, as well as around the country, understand that there's 40% of clean energy investments going into frontline communities like Harlem, like the Harlems of the world, and so, of the country, of course. And we need to understand that that money's coming into states and localities. We need to ensure that it gets to the communities it was intended for, because we know how that goes. Once money goes to a city or state, they find other ways to use it and other places to use it in. So the Justice 40 money, we're talking about millions, billions coming into the city for underinvested in communities. Also, another issue that's been coming up is that the Community Reserve Bank of New York, you know, the Community Reserve Banks are now considering really opening up and expanding their concept of the Community Reinvestment Act, only really investing in housing. And so now they are looking at new regulations that would encourage banks to basically invest in the urban Eat Highland effect, you know, cooling, white roofs, green infrastructure, more climate resilience. So there is good news that there is more investment that can be coming into communities like Harlem, like those all around New York City. And so we've got to hold our elected officials to ensure that that money comes to us. And I know Representative Espaillat, I know you're thinking about that investment, the money from the infrastructure bill as well, and how we can really use that in uptown communities.
Well, the folks can go into my page, and there is an interactive map there, and they could report any improvement that needs to occur, whether it is a backed up sewage line or waterfront resiliency projects or the Second Avenue subway or anything. And by the way, Second Avenue subway is at the engineering stage, and we're pushing hard for it to enter a full funding agreement by the end of the year. And it's looking really good. President Biden assigned $400 million to it, so the White House is committed to it. And that's something that will connect Harlem to the world. But you can use that map, that app in my page to report any particular need that your corner, your street, your neighborhood may have with regards to environmental justice and environmental issues. And so far, we've gotten over 200 of those. And my team would then follow up. We had a recent water tour around the waterfront in the district. WEACT was a part of that to identify also the big projects such as the Harlem River walkway that the city assigned $1 million for. And so we're expecting that to be very successful. But we also want to connect the Bronx part of the district to the waterfront. They're severely disconnected, and so there's a lot of projects that are important, and we have the monies through the infrastructure bill to address them. So we're working on that, and Peggy's group, WEACT, has been a leader in this effort.
And Congressman, I got to say that your staff is definitely on it. I understand that you're going to be running to another meeting, so I definitely have to give you major props for coming on Soul Lounge Primetime this evening. So
Thank you.
Sure. Absolutely.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
You got
thank you, Professor, and thank you, Peggy.
My pleasure. Thank you, Congressman.
Okay,
All right. So you heard that in terms of what's going on there in terms of the infrastructure bill. Professor Ford, give us your thoughts.
Well, there is this country has, and I taught this in classes. I was just thinking about it the other day. 10 years, 5 to 10 years ago, I was teaching a class and saying that this country has something like 15-20 trillion dollar infrastructure deficit. That is all the bridges, roads, and tunnels that need to be repaired before you build a new anything. Okay, it's just that's how much, because it's like, people sometimes they own a house, and the part of the house that nobody sees, they don't really do a lot with it. So the basement has mold in it or something like that, or the roof, the attic is messy and whatever. And nobody's looking at it until it falls through the ceiling or something. And I think that's the way governments, local, state, and federal, have been treating infrastructure over the years, which is that, well, that's not the part that we really need to pay attention to. Just one example, and because I know we're running out of time at this point, New York City, the entire New York City mass transit system has only 27% of the 400 something stations are accessible. Accessible people who are differently abled. 27%. This is the 21st century.
Wow.
The system was built 100 years ago, and we're only at 27% now, because nobody even thought about it or even did anything about it for a decade. Until about another 10 years ago. And so that's just one example. Of the kinds of things that need to be done. So yeah, the infrastructure bill is great, but if anybody thinks that we're good now, is making a big mistake. This is a long, ongoing, initiative that needs to be done, and if we don't, we'll suffer for it.
Gotcha. So go ahead, Night Watchman.
Well, I think we have to take some closing comments from our guests. We're so glad to have both of you on. I think, Peggy, we'd like to hear from you once again. Just some closing thoughts.
Well, there's been a lot of bad news in the last year or two, and it seems to keep coming. But at the same time, there is opportunity. And I think we've got to be prepared to take those opportunities. We've got to be prepared to utilize the investments that are coming into New York City. And we need to understand that we've got to do the community organizing, the civic engagement, to ensure that we have a strong base of folks ready to support progressive values.
Beautiful. And Ms. Shepard, do tell any events that we need to watch out for in terms of WEACT being involved in the fall.
Absolutely. Well, coming up is Harlem Week, and Lloyd Williams is very supportive of climate change. So there's going to be a number of panels. A lot of it will be virtual, so I hope everybody will be tuning into Climate Week, and certainly Harlem Week, rather. And then in September, we have Climate Week. So there'll be numerous activities. There'll be a lot of international folks coming into town, really talking about their issues. And we've got to understand that many of our families who live in the Caribbean are very impacted by climate change, and how we've got to be supporting the policies that are not only going to help our resilience here, but our friends and neighbors and family nearby who are in island states and other countries.
Beautiful. Professor Ford, some final closing thoughts.
Yes. Well, again, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and Night Watchman, of course. So I appreciate the opportunity. I would say again that one thing we hopefully we can talk about at another point in time, which is that this country is in very big danger of having a gerontocracy. There's too many people who are old who are still in charge. And I put my I'm 72 going on 73. I don't need to be running for Congress at this point. I don't no really. But we have a president who's going on 80. We have the Speaker of the House who's 82. The list kind of goes on when we go through whether it's the Congressional Black Caucus or we go through too many parts of we need to see. Peggy, you were talking about there's not enough people in the Get Out about the vote activity because they've aged out. The people that used to do that have aged out by and large, and nobody's come in behind them. And so we need to make a really concerted effort to see the young people to take their headphones off for a minute, and pay attention to what's going on, because they're going to inherit the world that we leave behind. And right now, there's too many people who are just keeping they say, I'm not leaving until they take the wheel out of my cold dead fingers. Well, we should be talking about succession. We should be talking about grooming. We should be talking about preparing people for leadership, as opposed to holding them back until we just can't hold them back anymore. That's not the way to see progress in our community. And you all know what I'm talking about. So and we have suffered from that in the Harlem community in particular for a half century. The truth is the truth. But in closing, I would just like to quote a favorite musical artist of mine, Bo Diddley, who said, "Live to love and love to live." Right, and so there we go.
Thank you, Professor. Night Watchman, take us home.
Well, you left us with a great question, which is how do we involve more young people in the process? So that will be a topic for another show, and we will be delighted to have both of you back to join us. We appreciate your point of view, your experiences, your expertise. And by the way, shout out to WEACT. They threw the best barbecue a couple of weeks ago. Sorry you missed it, Curtis, but I was there. Most of our elected officials were there, and it was the perfect complement of having a good time, but also getting a chance to talk to the people who are asking for our vote one-on-one. And it's just an example of the type of civic engagement that WEACT has been known for. So Excellent. You've been listening to Soul Lounge Primetime on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, also live streaming on YouTube and Facebook. You can find us every Monday night at 7 p.m. on the radio and 8 o'clock streaming on our platforms. Thank you. Join us, and we'll be back again next week.
Excellent.
Thank you. Good night.
No, thank you, guys.